Hey guys, welcome to RedSunStories. Hope you're doing well. Tonight, we enter the chambers of the Emperor's most beloved consort, a woman so beautiful that men die in her presence, hiding 9 tales and a hunger that has devoured kingdoms for 1,000 years. So, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what time it is for you. I would love to connect with you guys. Now let's dive into tonight's story together. The scent of camellias hung thick in the corridors of the imperial palace, mingling with incense that seemed to burn with an otherworldly sweetness. Emperor Toba's favorite consort drifted through the lamplight like a ghost wrapped in silk. Hair dark as midnight waterfalls, skin pale as snow after winter's first storm, eyes that glimmered with secrets no poet could name. They called her Tamamo no Me, the lady of the jeweled face, and her beauty was legend even in a court renowned for its elegance. Each night, the most learned scholars gathered in her chambers to hear her speak. She knew the movements of the stars, the language of ancient texts, the hidden meanings in poetry that had confounded masters for generations. Her voice was like honey poured over silver, her laughter the sound of temple bells in distant mountains. Men wept at her wisdom, women envied her grace, and each morning another soul grew ill, struck down by fevers that burned like foxfire, by nightmares that left them screaming, by omens no physician could name. On the night the imperial Onmyoji prepared his divinations, a fox screamed in the distant gardens, a scream that seemed almost human, rising and falling like a woman's cry of despair or rage. The sound echoed through the palace grounds, and in that moment, every lantern in Tamamo's chamber flickered as if touched by an invisible wind. The emperor's health was failing. For months now, he had grown weaker, his vitality draining away like water through cupped hands. The imperial physicians prescribed herbs, prayers, rituals. Nothing helped. He would lie in his chambers, pale and trembling, while Tamamo no Me sat beside him, her cool hand on his fevered brow, singing songs that seemed older than memory itself. Why did the most learned scholars fall ill in her presence? How could a soul so beautiful bring such doom? What was the true name of the emperor's favorite, and where had she come from on that autumn evening 3 years past, appearing at the palace gates wrapped in mist and moonlight? The court astrologer, Abe no Yasunari, stood in the shadow of a pillar, watching Tamamo glide past. He was a man who had studied the hidden arts since childhood, who could read the movements of spirits in smoke and the intentions of demons in dreams. His grandfather had been the legendary Abe no Saime, greatest of all Onmyoji, and the blood of magic ran through his veins like a second river beneath the ordinary flow of life. He had watched Tamamo no Me for weeks now, observing details others missed. The way lanterns dimmed when she passed, the way dogs would not approach her, their hackles raised, their whines high and fearful, the way her shadow sometimes seemed to move independently, flickering with shapes that suggested tales, too many tales, trailing behind her perfect form. Tonight, he would perform the ritual. Tonight, he would look past the illusion of beauty and see what truly stood before the emperor's throne. The palace grounds stretched vast and silent under the moon. Gardens arranged in perfect symmetry reflected centuries of imperial elegance. Manicured pines casting shadows on white gravel, koi ponds still as mirrors, cherry trees waiting for spring's resurrection. But beneath the beauty, something ancient stirred, something that had walked the world for 1,000 years, wearing different faces, bringing ruin to courts and kingdoms, feeding on the devotion and destruction of the powerful. In the shadows beyond the palace walls, foxes gathered. Dozens of them, their eyes gleaming like amber lanterns in the darkness. They sat in a circle, perfectly still, as if waiting for a signal only they could hear. The common folk whispered about them, made offerings of rice and sake at the fox shrines, prayed for protection from the spirits that walked on 2 legs and 4. Tamamo no Mae stood at her window, looking out at the moonlit gardens. For a moment, just a heartbeat, her elegant form seemed to shimmer, and in the reflection on the paper screen, 9 tails spread behind her like a fan of silver fire. Then she blinked, and the illusion vanished, leaving only a beautiful woman gazing at the night with eyes full of ancient sorrow. She knew they were coming for her. She had always known. In every life, in every court, there came a moment when the mask would slip, when someone would look too closely and see past the enchantment to the hungry spirit beneath. In China, she had been Daji, consort to King Zhou, and they had blamed her when his dynasty crumbled into blood and tyranny. In India, she had been Lady Kao, and her beauty had brought princes to their knees and kingdoms to ashes. Now, in Japan, she was Tamamo no Mae, and her time was running short once more. The illness had begun subtly, as these things always do. Emperor Toba first noticed it after the autumn festival, when Tamamo no Mae had danced beneath the harvest moon, her movements so graceful that even the wind seemed to still, watching. He had felt dizzy then, lightheaded, as if the world had tilted on its axis and left him floating in a space between earth and heaven. The next morning, he could not rise from his bed. Weakness flooded his limbs, and his dreams were strange, filled with running through endless forests, chasing something that was always just ahead, always out of reach. He dreamed of golden eyes watching from the shadows, of laughter that echoed like bells in fog, of a voice whispering secrets in a language he almost understood. The imperial physicians arrived with their herbs and needles, their consultations and concerned murmurs. They spoke of imbalanced humors, of seasonal afflictions, of the emperor's need for rest and meditation. They prescribed bitter teas and incense, rituals to harmonize his spirit with the flow of natural forces. Nothing changed. The emperor grew paler, more drawn, his vitality seeping away like autumn leaves, falling one by one from bare branches. Tamamo no Mae remained at his side, devoted and sorrowful. She read to him from ancient texts, her voice soft as summer rain. She prepared delicate dishes with her own hands, though he could barely eat. She sang songs from distant provinces, melodies that seemed to drift from another world entirely, carrying memories of mountains and moonlight, of forests where foxes danced in circles under stars that had watched the birth of time itself. The courtiers whispered. They had always whispered since the day Tamamo first appeared, but now the whispers grew louder, more urgent, tinged with fear. Lady Sanjo, the emperor's sister, confided to her attendants that she had seen Tamamo walking in the garden at midnight, conversing with shadows that moved like animals standing on 2 legs. Lord Fujiwara claimed he had followed Tamamo once and watched her vanish into thin air near the fox shrine beyond the palace gates, only to reappear hours later as if she had never left her chambers. The scholars who gathered at Tamamo's evening salons began to fall ill as well. Master Yoshida, renowned for his knowledge of Chinese classics, collapsed during a poetry recital, speaking in tongues, languages that sounded ancient and inhuman, rising and falling like the cries of wild creatures. Lady Kiyomori developed strange marks on her arms, patterns that looked like claw marks, though she swore no animal had touched her. The young priest Ryugen, who had come to debate philosophy with Tamamo, succumbed to nightmares so terrible that he refused to sleep, walking the halls at night with his eyes wide and seeing horrors in every shadow. Abe no Yasunari watched it all, making notes in his journal by candlelight, correlating the pattern of illnesses with Tamamo's movements, with lunar phases, with the behavior of animals in the palace grounds. Foxes appeared wherever she went. The koi in the ponds would dive deep when she approached, as if hiding from a predator. Birds fell silent when she walked beneath the trees, their songs dying in their throats. He consulted his grandfather's texts, scrolls wrapped in silk and stored in locked chests, protected by seals and prayers. The writings of Abe no Saime spoke of ancient spirits that wore human form, creatures of immense power and endless hunger. They spoke of the Kitsune, the fox spirits, who could live for centuries, accumulating tales as they aged, each tale a mark of power, each century another layer of cunning and magic. The most dangerous were the nine-tailed foxes, the Kyubi no Kitsune, spirits so old and powerful they could topple kingdoms, seduce emperors, bring plague and prosperity with equal ease. They fed on life force, on devotion and desire, growing stronger as those around them weakened. And they were beautiful, impossibly, dangerously beautiful. Their glamour so potent that men would die for a single smile. Women would weep at the sound of their laughter. Yasunari's hands trembled as he read. Every description matched Tamamo no Me, the unnatural beauty, the impossible knowledge, the deaths and illness following in her wake, the foxes that gathered at night, waiting like an army for their general's command. He would need to perform the ritual of true seeing, the divine revelation that stripped away all illusions and showed spirits in their authentic forms. It was dangerous. If Tamamo truly was what he suspected, confronting her could mean his death, or worse. But the emperor was dying, and with him, the stability of the realm. Yasunari had sworn an oath to protect the imperial line, to stand between the throne and the darkness that pressed against the borders of the human world. He prepared in secret, gathering the necessary components: white sage from the mountains, water from a shrine dedicated to Inari, the fox deity, paper talismans inscribed with prayers in his own blood, a mirror polished until it reflected not just physical forms, but spiritual essence. He fasted for 3 days, purifying himself, preparing his mind for the confrontation that would come. On the third night, under a waning moon, he requested an audience with Emperor Toba and his consort. The emperor, weak and feverish, agreed. Tamamo no Me smiled her beautiful smile and said she would be honored to attend, though her eyes, those golden, ancient eyes, held a knowledge that made Yasunari's blood run cold. The audience chamber was prepared according to Yasunari's specifications. Lanterns arranged in a specific pattern, forming a protective circle. Incense burning in bronze vessels, filling the air with smoke that revealed rather than concealed. The polished mirror placed where it would catch the light, just so, reflecting truth instead of appearance. Emperor Toba sat on his dais, looking like a ghost of himself, his robes hanging loose on his withered frame. Tamamo no Me knelt beside him, her beauty undimmed, untouched by the sickness that consumed those around her. She wore robes of white and gold, colors of purity and divinity, mocking the sacred with her very existence. Yasunari entered and bowed low. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, ancient and knowing, amused and dangerous. She understood what he intended. She had played this scene before, in other courts, under other names, and always she had escaped. Imperial Majesty, Yasunari said, his voice steady despite the fear thrumming through his veins. I have divined the source of your illness. With your permission, I would perform a ritual to reveal the truth and restore your health. The Emperor nodded weakly. Do what you must, Abe no Yasunari. I trust in your wisdom as I trusted in your grandfather's. Tamamo no Mai said nothing. She simply smiled, and in that smile was the patience of centuries, the confidence of a predator that had never truly been caught. Yasunari began the ritual as the incense smoke thickened, curling through the chamber like serpents made of mist. He chanted, in the old language, words that predated Buddhism, reaching back to the indigenous magic of Japan, prayers to kami and spirits, invocations of protection, commands for truth to reveal itself. His voice rose and fell in rhythms that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the earth itself. The lanterns flickered. The smoke began to move in patterns that defied natural wind, spiraling around Tamamo no Mae like a cage of translucent threads. She remained perfectly still, her expression serene, but something changed in her eyes. A flash of amber, a glimpse of wildness quickly concealed. Yasunari held up the mirror, positioning it so that it caught Tamamo's reflection at the precise angle he had calculated. The polished bronze surface rippled like water disturbed by rain, and for a moment, the reflection showed not a beautiful woman, but something else, a shape with too many tails, eyes that burned like foxfire, a muzzle full of teeth sharp as winter. Emperor Toba gasped, his hand reaching for the armrest of his throne. What? What is this? But Yasunari did not stop. He continued the chant, louder now, more insistent, calling upon Amaterasu's light, upon the wisdom of Inari, upon all the protective forces of heaven and earth. The talismans he had placed around the chamber began to glow with a faint blue light, forming a web of power that pressed inward, constricting the space where illusion could hide. Tamamo no Mae stood slowly, gracefully, her movements fluid as water. When she spoke, her voice was unchanged, still beautiful, still hypnotic, but now carrying an edge of something ancient and wild. You are clever, Onmyoji, cleverer than most. But do you understand what you have done? The air in the chamber grew heavy, electric, as if lightning were about to strike. The lanterns blazed brighter, then dimmer, flickering between extremes. In the wavering light, Tamamo's shadow on the wall began to change, stretching and expanding, showing the truth her human form concealed. 9 tails unfurled behind her, each one made of silver fire and moonlight. Her ears lengthened, became pointed, covered in fine white fur. Her eyes blazed golden, ancient, filled with the weight of centuries beyond counting. Her teeth sharpened, and when she smiled, it was the smile of a fox who had tasted the blood of emperors, the despair of kingdoms, the sweetness of devotion twisted into doom. I am Tamamo no Mae, she said, her voice echoing with harmonics that seemed to come from multiple sources at once. But I have been other names, in other lands. I was Daji, who danced while the Shang dynasty burned. I was Lady Kao, who brought the Magadha princes to their knees. I am the hunger that lives in beauty, the death that wears desire's face. I am 1,000 years of winter moonlight given form and will. Emperor Toba tried to stand, but collapsed back onto his throne, his face ashen. Why? He whispered. Why did you do this to me? Tamamo's expression softened, and for a moment there was genuine sadness in those ancient eyes. Because I am what I am, Imperial Majesty. A kitsune must feed, and you loved me so beautifully, so completely, that your life force sang to me like the finest music. I did not choose you out of malice. I chose you because your devotion was exquisite. You're killing him, Yasunari said, his hand moving to the ritual blade at his side. You're draining his life to sustain your own existence. I am, Tamamo acknowledged, as I have done for centuries, as I will do for centuries more unless you can stop me. But know this, clever Onmyoji, I have been hunted before, I have been caught before, and I always escape, I always return. Beauty and death are eternal companions, and I am both. The protective circle of talismans blazed brighter, their blue light forming walls that trapped Tamamo within the chamber. She looked at them with something like respect, tilting her head in that distinctly fox-like way. Impressive. Your grandfather would be proud. But do you truly think paper and prayers can hold me? She moved so fast that mortal eyes could barely follow. One moment she stood in the center of the chamber, the next she was at the wall, her claws, yes, claws now, sharp as obsidian, tearing through the talismans as if they were made of spider silk. The protective circle shattered, its power dissipating into smoke and sparks. Guards rushed into the chamber, their swords drawn, but Tamamo was already gone. She leaped through the window with inhuman grace, her 9 tails streaming behind her like banners of silver flame. In the courtyard below, the assembled foxes howled, dozens of them, hundreds, their voices rising in a chorus that sounded like celebration and lamentation combined. Yasunari ran to the window, watching as Tamamo's form blurred and shifted, becoming fully fox now, a creature the size of a horse, white as snow, beautiful as death. She bounded across the palace grounds, over walls, into the darkness beyond, and the lesser foxes followed in a river of golden eyes and rustling fur. Alert the hunters, Yasunari commanded. Send word to every shrine, every temple. Tamamo no Me has been revealed. The hunt begins now. Emperor Toba lay on his throne, weeping. His beautiful consort, the woman he had loved more than life itself, had been a demon all along. His vitality, his health, his very soul had been feeding a creature of nightmare and hunger. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade, but already he felt marginally better. The drain on his life force had ceased the moment Tamamo fled. Color was returning to his cheeks. His breathing came easier. The curse was broken, though the scars would remain forever. Word spread across the empire like wildfire. Tamamo no Me, the 9-tailed fox, the demon consort, had been revealed and had fled. She was somewhere in the wilderness, and Emperor Toba commanded that she be found and destroyed, lest she return to prey upon the people once more. The greatest warriors of the land assembled, Miura no Suke and Kazusa no Suke, legendary archers whose arrows never missed their mark, monks from Mount Hiei who had studied the ways of subduing demons, onmyoji from every province, each bringing their own techniques for binding and banishing spirits. They gathered weapons blessed by priests, arrows tipped with silver, spells written on special paper that could pierce illusions and reveal truth. The hunt began under a new moon, when darkness was absolute and the line between the mortal world and the spirit realm grew thin. The hunters moved in formation, spreading across the countryside like a net drawing closed. Dogs trained to track supernatural beings led the way, their howls echoing through valleys and over hills, following a scent that was not quite physical, more like the lingering trace of magic, the residue of ancient power. Tamamo fled eastward, toward the wild lands beyond civilization's reach. She moved through forests where trees grew so densely that daylight never touched the ground, where moss covered stones older than human memory. She crossed rivers that ran cold and black, their waters reflecting no stars. She climbed mountains where the wind sang songs in voices that might have been human once, long ago, before they forgot their names and became part of the eternal storm. The foxes accompanied her, her children, her followers, her witnesses. They had served her for centuries, these lesser Kitsune, drawn to her power and beauty, loyal beyond death. They formed a perimeter around her as she ran, warning her of approaching danger, creating illusions to mislead the hunters, sacrificing themselves when necessary to buy her precious minutes of escape. But the hunters were relentless. Led by Miura no Suke, they pressed forward despite exhaustion, despite fear, despite the supernatural terrors that assailed them in the darkness. They saw visions of their loved ones calling from the shadows, heard voices promising them wealth and pleasure if they would only abandon the chase. Some succumbed, wandering off into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Others pushed forward, their faith or stubbornness stronger than Tamamo's illusions. Yasunari traveled with the hunters, reading the signs, divining Tamamo's direction, reinforcing the warrior's resolve with prayers and protective charms. He felt her presence like a distant star, cold, bright, impossibly far, and yet somehow close enough to touch. She was weakening. The revelation had cost her power, broken the connection to her primary source of sustenance. Without the Emperor's devotion to feed on, she was burning through her reserves, growing more desperate with each passing hour. They pursued her through winter's heart, across landscapes turned white with snow, where their breath froze in the air, and their fingers grew numb despite the fire talismans Yasunari provided. Tamamo left traces of her passing. Paw, prints larger than any natural fox's, scorched earth where her tails had brushed the ground, trees that had withered and died from proximity to her fear and rage. On the 5th night, they found one of her followers, a small fox, barely more than a kit, who had been wounded in a skirmish with an advance patrol. It lay in the snow, panting, its eyes dim with approaching death. Yasunari knelt beside it, and in its gaze, he saw something unexpected. Love, pure and absolute. This creature loved Tamamo no Me. It had given its life willingly, joyfully, to grant her a few more moments of freedom. Why? Yasunari asked, though he knew the fox could not answer in words. Why serve a demon? But in the dying creature's eyes, he thought he glimpsed an answer. Tamamo was not merely a predator. She was something more complex, more tragic. She was beauty and death intertwined, yes, but also loneliness and longing, a spirit that had lived too long, seen too much, and found no place in either the mortal world or the realm of spirits where she truly belonged. The fox died, and Yasunari continued the pursuit with a strange heaviness in his heart. They found her at Nasu, on a volcanic plain where nothing grew, where the earth itself seemed poisoned by some ancient catastrophe. Steam rose from vents in the ground, sulfurous and toxic. The stones were black and twisted, shaped by forces too terrible to name. It was a place of death, fitting for what was to come. Tamamo stood in the center of the plain, her 9 tails spread wide, her white fur stained with mud and blood. She was wounded. The hunters had scored hits with their blessed arrows, and even a spirit as powerful as she could not ignore such injuries forever. Around her lay the bodies of dozens of foxes, her loyal followers who had sacrificed themselves to slow the pursuit, to give their lady a chance to escape that had never truly existed. The hunters surrounded her, weapons ready, but they did not immediately attack. There was something in Tamamo's posture, in the way she held herself, that commanded respect despite everything. She was ancient and powerful, a force of nature as much as a demon, and even in defeat, she retained her terrible dignity. Miura no Suke stepped forward, his bow drawn, arrow nocked and aimed at Tamamo's heart. "Tamamo no me," he called out, his voice carrying across the barren plain. "You are surrounded. Surrender yourself to justice, and your death will be swift." Tamamo laughed, and the sound was like bells breaking, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. Justice? What justice is there for a creature like me? I am what I was made to be, a spirit of hunger and desire, beauty and death. I have lived for 1,000 years, and in that time, I have learned that there is no justice, only survival, and eventually, extinction. She looked at Yasunari, who stood beside the archer. "You understand, don't you, clever Onmyoji? You've read the texts. You know what I am. I am not evil in the way humans understand evil. I am simply other, a manifestation of forces that existed before humanity named them, that will exist after humanity forgets how to speak. I am the beauty that leads men to ruin because they cannot possess it. I am the hunger that can never be satisfied. I am the ghost of what the world was before civilization tried to order it into submission." Yasunari felt tears on his cheeks, though he could not say why. "You killed innocent people. You drained the Emperor's life. How can that not be evil?" "Because I am a fox," Tamamo said simply. "When a fox kills a rabbit, is it evil? When a storm drowns a village, is it malicious? I am what nature made me, and I cannot be other than what I am. But I am tired now, so very tired. I have worn so many faces, loved so many souls in my way, destroyed so much beauty in pursuit of my own existence. Perhaps it is time to rest." She turned her gaze to the sky, where stars were beginning to appear in the twilight. "Do you know what the worst part is? I remember every life I've taken, every person who loved me, every kingdom I helped destroy. I carry them all inside me, their hopes, their dreams, their final moments. I am a repository of human sorrow, and I can never forget, can never let go. That is my curse, greater than any prison, any death you could devise." Miura no Suke's hands trembled on his bow. He was a warrior, trained to kill demons without hesitation, but Tamamo's words had shaken something in him. This was not the simple evil he had expected. This was something far more complex, more tragic. Yasunari stepped forward. "If you surrender, if you allow yourself to be bound—" "Bound?" Tamamo interrupted. "Locked away in some shrine, trapped for centuries until I go mad? No, Onmyoji. I choose a cleaner end. But know this, I will leave something behind. A warning, a reminder, a piece of myself that will outlast even death, to tell future generations that beauty and danger walk hand in hand, that desire always has a price, that some hungers can never be satisfied without destroying everything you touch." She closed her eyes, and her form began to shimmer. The hunters tensed, expecting an attack, but what came was something else entirely. Tamamo was not fighting anymore. She was transforming, channeling all her remaining power into one final act of will. The blessed arrows flew. They struck true, each one finding its mark, piercing her heart, her throat, her eyes. She did not cry out. She simply stood, accepting the death she had chosen, embracing the end of a life that had stretched across centuries and continents and countless human tragedies. As her body fell, it began to change. Fur became stone, blood became mineral. Her 9 tails hardened into crystalline structures, sharp and beautiful and deadly. Where Tamamo no Me died, a massive stone emerged from the earth, black as midnight, smooth as ice, radiating a cold malevolence that made the hunters step back in fear. The Seshoseki, the killing stone, Tamamo's final legacy, her curse and her monument, her warning and her grave. Yasunari approached the stone carefully, feeling its power even from a distance. It was poison incarnate, death given form, the concentrated essence of 1,000 years of hunger and sorrow. Any living thing that touched it would die. Any creature that lingered too close would sicken and perish. It was beautiful and terrible, exactly like the spirit it had been. "What do we do with it?" Miura no Suke asked, his voice hushed with awe and dread. "Nothing," Yasunari replied. "We mark this place as forbidden. We warn people to stay away, and we remember what she said, that beauty and danger are eternal companions, that some things in this world can never be tamed or controlled, only survived. This stone will remain here as long as the earth endures, a reminder of Tamamo no Me, the nine-tailed fox who loved and killed with equal passion." The hunters departed, leaving the Seshoseki alone on the volcanic plain. Around it, nothing would ever grow again. The very earth rejected life in that place, poisoned by the concentrated essence of Tamamo's death. But sometimes, on moonlit nights, villagers claimed they could see a white fox sitting beside the stone, 9 tails fanned out behind it, waiting for something. Perhaps for rebirth, perhaps for forgiveness, perhaps simply for someone to understand. Years passed. The Seshoseki remained on Nasu Plain, a place of pilgrimage for the curious and the brave, a destination for those seeking to test their courage or their connection to the supernatural. Priests came to perform rituals, trying to purify the stone, to release whatever remained of Tamamo's spirit. Nothing worked. The stone remained, immutable and deadly, a permanent scar on the landscape. Emperor Toba recovered from his illness, though he was never quite the same. He lived another 2 decades, ruling with wisdom born from betrayal and loss. He never took another consort. When courtiers suggested he should marry again, produce more heirs, he would shake his head and gaze into the distance as if seeing something others could not. "I loved a demon," he would say quietly. "How could any mortal woman compare?" Yasunari spent the remainder of his life studying the nature of Kitsune, trying to understand what Tamamo had been, what she had represented. He wrote extensive treatises on fox spirits, their origins, their motivations, their place in the cosmic order. But his writings were tinged with sadness, with the understanding that some mysteries can never be fully solved. Some creatures can never be fully understood. He returned to Nasu Plain often, standing at a safe distance from the Seshoseki, studying it with the tools of his art. He could feel Tamamo's presence still, a faint echo of consciousness trapped within the stone. She was not gone, not truly. She was waiting, patient as only a creature that had lived for centuries could be, for the conditions that would allow her resurrection. Villages grew around the Forbidden Plain, communities of people who made their living by guiding pilgrims, selling charms and talismans, telling stories of the beautiful demon who had almost destroyed an empire. The tale of Tamamo no Me became legend, passed down through generations, growing more elaborate with each telling. Some versions painted her as pure evil, a malevolent demon who had seduced the emperor for the pleasure of causing suffering. Others portrayed her more sympathetically, as a tragic figure caught between her nature and her desires, doomed by what she was to destroy what she loved. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in the uncertain space between. Children grew up hearing stories of Tamamo before bed, cautionary tales about the dangers of beauty, about trusting too easily, about the supernatural forces that lurked just beyond the firelight. Young women were told to be wary of strangers with too perfect faces, too perfect knowledge, who seemed to know things no mortal should know. Young men learned to question their desires, to look beyond surface beauty to the reality beneath. The Sessoseki became more than just a stone. It became a symbol, a touchstone for Japanese culture's complex relationship with beauty, danger, and the supernatural. Artists painted it. Poets wrote verses about it. Monks meditated before it, seeking enlightenment through contemplation of death and impermanence. And always, in the dark hours before dawn, foxes gathered around the stone. They sat in circles, their eyes glowing in the pre-dawn gloom, and they sang, if the sounds they made could be called singing. High, keening notes that echoed across the plain, carrying grief and longing, and something that might have been prayer. The villagers learned to live with it, the way people learn to live with volcanoes or earthquakes or any other force of nature too powerful to control. They made offerings at fox shrines, prayed for protection, and told themselves that as long as the stone remained intact, as long as Tamamo's essence was trapped within it, they were safe. But stones, like all things, are not eternal. Centuries accumulated like dust, each generation adding their stories to the legend of Tamamo no Mae. The Heian period gave way to the Kamakura, then the Muromachi, the Sengoku, the Edo. Emperors rose and fell. Shoguns battled for control. The world changed, modernized, became unrecognizable to those who had first sealed Tamamo within her stone prison. But the Sessoseki remained, weathered by centuries of rain and wind and snow, yet still intact, still deadly, still carrying within it the compressed essence of a nine-tailed fox's death and rage and sorrow. In the year 2022, something changed. Perhaps it was the earth itself shifting, tectonic forces grinding against each other in the deep places beneath the volcanic plain. Perhaps it was spiritual in nature, some cosmic cycle completing, some debt finally paid. Perhaps it was simply time. Even death has its seasons, and all prisons eventually crumble. The Sessoseki cracked. It happened early one morning, before dawn, when mist hung heavy over Nasu Plain and the world seemed caught between sleeping and waking. The sound was like thunder, like the earth breaking, a deep, resonant crack that echoed for miles. Villagers woke in terror, rushing from their homes to see what catastrophe had occurred. The stone had split nearly in half, a jagged line running through its heart. The pieces remained upright, but the integrity was gone. The seal that had held Tamamo's spirit for so long was broken. Immediately, people felt it. A change in the air, a presence stirring, something ancient awakening from a sleep deeper than dreams. The very atmosphere seemed to shimmer with power, and those sensitive to such things spoke of hearing laughter on the wind, beautiful and terrible, like bells in a storm. Priests rushed to the site, performing emergency rituals, trying to reinforce the seal, to prevent whatever remained of Tamamo from escaping. But they were too late. Something had already slipped through the crack. A wisp of consciousness, a fragment of soul, freed after centuries of imprisonment. Where it went, no one could say. Some claimed to see a white fox running across the plain at dawn, 9 tails streaming behind it like ribbons of mist. Others spoke of dreams, vivid, unsettling dreams of a beautiful woman wandering lost through modern cities, confused by the changed world, searching for something she could not name. Scientists came to study the stone, offering explanations about weathering and geological stress and natural processes that had nothing to do with spirits or curses. But the locals knew better. They had lived with Tamamo's legacy for generations. They understood that some things could not be explained by science alone, that the world still held mysteries too deep for rational understanding. Yasunari's descendants, still practicing the onmyoji arts in their way, came to assess the situation. They performed divinations, read omens, consulted ancient texts. Their conclusion was troubling, but not unexpected. Tamamo no Mei's spirit had been released, but not in full. Only a fragment had escaped, the rest remaining trapped within the broken stone. She was free, but not completely. Conscious, but not entirely. It was a liminal state, caught between existence and non-existence, between death and resurrection. The question everyone asked was, what would she do now? If Tamamo's fragment wandered the modern world, it did so quietly, leaving only the faintest traces. There were no reports of mysterious illnesses, no emperors or leaders falling under inexplicable spells. Perhaps she was too weak, too dispersed. Perhaps the modern world, with its electric lights and digital networks and constant noise, was inhospitable to a spirit born in candlelight and silence. Or perhaps she had learned something during her centuries of imprisonment. Perhaps the trap of stone had given her time to reflect, to understand the pattern of her existence, the cycle of beauty and destruction that she could never break, the way her hunger always led to suffering, her own as much as others. Some people began to have dreams. They were vivid but gentle, not nightmares, but something more bittersweet. They dreamed of walking through ancient palace corridors, of hearing music played on instruments long forgotten, of seeing a beautiful woman with sad eyes who spoke in a language the dreamers could not understand, but somehow felt in their hearts. "I am so tired," the dream woman would say. "I have lived too long, seen too much. I destroyed so many beautiful things in my hunger to continue existing. I wore so many faces, loved so many souls in my incomplete way. And for what? To spend centuries trapped in stone, remembering every mistake, every cruelty, every moment when I could have chosen differently, but didn't?" The dreamers would wake with tears on their faces, though they couldn't quite remember why they were crying. They would feel a strange compassion for something they couldn't name, a desire to forgive someone who had never asked for forgiveness. Art began to change subtly. Painters found themselves drawing foxes without quite knowing why. Writers crafted stories about beautiful demons seeking redemption. Composers created melodies that seemed to echo with ancient sorrow. It was as if Tamamo's fragmentary consciousness was bleeding into the cultural imagination, infecting the creative dreams of those sensitive enough to sense her presence. At Nasu Plain, the broken Sessoseki became a pilgrimage site once more, but with a different character than before. People came not to fear the stone, but to pay respects, to leave offerings of rice and sake, to pray not for protection, but for peace, both for themselves and for the spirit that had been imprisoned there. The change was subtle, but significant. Tamamo was no longer just a demon to be feared and contained. She was becoming something else in the cultural consciousness. A tragic figure, a warning, yes, but also a reminder of the cost of living, the burden of consciousness, the terrible loneliness of existing outside the normal flow of life and death. Scholars debated what this meant. Was it dangerous to feel sympathy for such a creature? Was compassion itself a kind of trap, lowering people's defenses against supernatural threats? Or was this evolution and understanding a sign of maturity, humanity, learning to hold space for complexity, for the truth that even demons might carry their own sorrows? At night, especially during the full moon, people walking near fox shrines would sometimes hear singing, high, clear notes that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. If they were brave enough to investigate, they might glimpse shadows, moving in ways shadows should not move, or see eyes glowing golden in the darkness, watching with an intensity that was ancient and tired and somehow gentle. The foxes themselves seemed different, more present, as if their connection to their legendary ancestor had been renewed. They left offerings at shrines dedicated to Inari, performed rituals that looked almost human in their deliberateness. They gathered in circles under the moon and sang their wordless songs, and those who listened carefully thought they could hear within the howls something like grief, like longing, like a prayer for release. What is it like to be Tamamo no Me? What does it mean to carry the memories of 1,000 years, to remember every face you wore, every soul you consumed, every kingdom you helped destroy? The fragment of consciousness that escaped the Seshoseki grappled with these questions in its dispersed, incomplete way. She remembered being Daji in ancient China. She remembered King Zhou's obsession, the way his love had twisted into madness, the way an entire dynasty had collapsed because a fox spirit had worn a beautiful face. She remembered the screams, the fires, the desperate attempts to placate an emperor who had forgotten how to be human, and she remembered feeling nothing, just hunger, just the need to feed, to continue existing, no matter the cost. She remembered being Lady Ko in India, seducing princes and Brahmins, learning the secrets of spiritual practice only to pervert them, using sacred knowledge for profane purposes. She remembered temples built in her honor by men who thought her divine, only to watch those same temples burn when the truth was revealed. She remembered running then too, always running, because beauty and terror cannot long coexist in the same space without causing catastrophe. And she remembered Japan, remembered Emperor Toba's gentle hands, his kind voice, the way he would read poetry to her in the garden, finding beauty in cherry blossoms and autumn leaves and the small, perfect moments that made life worth living. She had consumed his vitality like wine, savoring each drop, and part of her had genuinely cared for him, as much as a fox could care for a human, which was never quite enough, never quite real. She remembered Yasunari too, the clever onmyoji with his grandfather's texts and his determination to protect his emperor. He had seen through her glamour, had revealed her truth, had chased her across half the empire, but in his eyes, at the end, she had seen something unexpected. Pity. He had understood somehow that she was as much a victim of her nature as those she victimized in turn. The stone prison had been terrible, but also a relief in its way. For centuries, she had been still, unable to hunt, unable to feed, unable to continue the cycle of beauty and destruction that had defined her existence. In that enforced stillness, she had been forced to simply remember, to sit with the accumulated weight of all she had done, all she had been. And slowly, over those centuries, something had shifted. The hunger remained, would always remain. It was fundamental to what she was. But alongside it grew something else. Understanding, perhaps. Regret, maybe. The knowledge that hunger without limit is its own curse, that consuming everything beautiful leaves only emptiness behind. Now freed but fragmented, she wandered the modern world like a ghost, observing but not fully participating. She watched people fall in love and part ways, watched beauty bloom and fade, watched the endless cycle of desire and satisfaction and renewed desire, and she felt something like envy for those whose lives were brief enough to be contained, whose loves could be real because they were limited, whose hungers could be satisfied because they ended with death. She visited Nasu Plain sometimes, her fragmentary consciousness drawing close to the broken stone that had held her for so long. The rest of her essence remained there, trapped but dormant, waiting. For what? She no longer knew. Resurrection seemed less appealing than it once had. Freedom had lost its luster when she understood that freedom meant only resuming the pattern. Beauty, love, betrayal, destruction, flight, death, and somehow resurrection to begin again. Perhaps the broken stone was better understood not as a broken seal, but as a partially open door. Not enough to let her fully through, but enough to let something escape. The part of her that had learned to feel sorrow, to question, to wish for something other than what she was. The rest could stay in the stone, the parts that were pure hunger, pure instinct, pure fox without the complications of consciousness and memory. She wondered if this was what humans called redemption, not the erasure of past sins, but the bearing of their weight, the choice to be different, even when your nature pulls you toward familiar patterns. It was a strange thought for a demon, almost heretical. But then, she had always been a strange demon, too smart for her own good, too aware of the ironies and tragedies of her existence. In the mountains near Nasu, there lived an old fox. She was not a nine-tailed Kitsune, not a demon of legend, just an ordinary fox who had lived a long life by fox standards, 10, perhaps 12 years. But among foxes, she was known as wise, one who understood the old ways, who remembered the stories passed down through generations. Young foxes would come to her, asking questions, seeking guidance, and she would tell them the story of Tamamo no Me, though she told it differently than humans did. Long ago, she would begin, there was a fox who forgot she was a fox. She lived so long and grew so powerful that she began to think herself something other, a deity, perhaps, or a force of nature. She wore human faces so convincingly that she half believed them herself. She consumed human lives and human loves, and convinced herself it was her right, her nature, her purpose. But here is what the humans don't understand. Every fox is both itself and more than itself. We are tricksters, yes, and hunters. We are beautiful and dangerous. But we are also children of Inari, spirits of the liminal spaces, beings that exist between the tame and the wild, the sacred and the profane. And when we forget that, when we forget our place in the great web of existence, we become monsters. Tamamo no Me became a monster, not because she was evil. Foxes don't understand evil as humans do, but because she lost balance. She took too much, gave too little, forgot that even hunger must be part of a cycle, not an end in itself. And so the world corrected her, as it always does, sealed her in stone, made her wait, forced her to remember what she had forgotten. And perhaps she learned. Perhaps that's why only part of her escaped when the stone broke. Perhaps the rest stays willingly now, understanding that some hungers should remain unfed, some desires unspoken, some forms unworn. Perhaps wisdom, for a fox, means knowing when not to transform, when not to seduce, when not to consume. The young foxes would listen, their eyes wide in the darkness, and they would understand, in the way foxes understand things, that this was not just a story about Tamamo no Me. It was a story about all of them, about the dangers and responsibilities of being a creature that walks between worlds, that can be both beautiful and deadly, both blessing and curse. And sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and the wind carried whispers from ancient places, the old fox would add a coda to her tale. They say Tamamo still wanders, a fragment of what she was, unable to die, unable to fully live. And perhaps that is her punishment and her salvation combined, to exist in the space between, to witness without fully participating, to understand all she lost through her hunger while being unable to reclaim it. Or perhaps it is something else. Perhaps she is learning to be a fox again, just a fox, not a demon or a deity or a force of destruction. Perhaps she is learning that existence without consumption, presence without possession, is possible. Perhaps she is learning to be still. The young foxes would go away thoughtful, carrying the story in their bones, remembering it when they were tempted to use their gifts for mischief or malice. And the old fox would sit alone, watching the stars, wondering if somewhere out there, Tamamo no Mae was learning the same lessons, was finding peace in limitation, was discovering that the greatest magic is not transformation, but acceptance. Years passed after the Seshoseki cracked, and the world grew accustomed to its new reality. A legendary demon partially freed, wandering the world in fragmentary form, causing no harm but leaving traces in dreams and art, and the strange behavior of foxes near shrines. The stone itself became a curiosity, a tourist attraction. People took photographs standing next to it, smiling, unaware that they were posing with what was essentially a spiritual grave and prison combined. They bought souvenirs, keychains shaped like foxes, postcards showing the cracked stone, books retelling Tamamo's legend in lurid detail. But for those who came with the right intention, with respect and openness, the stone still offered something. They would stand before it in silence, feeling the weight of centuries, the accumulated sorrow of a life that had stretched too long and caused too much pain. And sometimes they would receive something in return, not a vision exactly, more like a feeling, an understanding that bypassed language and entered directly into intuition. The understanding was always the same, though each person experienced it differently. Beauty is dangerous because it makes us forget ourselves. Desire is destructive because it consumes both the desirer and the desired. And yet, beauty and desire are also what make life worth living, what lift us above mere survival into something transcendent. The key is balance, limitation, the wisdom to know when to pursue and when to release, when to consume and when to abstain. It was the wisdom Tamamo had learned too late, paid for in centuries of imprisonment and the dissolution of her being. And it was the wisdom she offered now from her broken prison, a gift to those who would listen. One night, a young woman came to the stone. She was an artist, struggling with her work, feeling the tension between her desire to create something beautiful and her fear that beauty itself was a lie, a trap, something that seduced and destroyed. She had read about Tamamo no Mae, felt a strange kinship with this legendary figure who had used beauty as a weapon and been destroyed by it in turn. She stood before the Seshoseki as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that hurt to look at. Too beautiful, too perfect, destined to fade in minutes. She wept, though she couldn't quite articulate why. For herself, for Tamamo, for all the beautiful things that contained within them the seeds of their own destruction. And as she wept, she felt something, a presence, gentle and melancholy, touching her consciousness like a breeze touches water. Not words exactly, but meaning conveyed directly. Create your beauty, but know it is temporary. Love your art, but do not let it consume you. Seduce the world with your visions, but remember that you are more than what you make, more than what others see. I forgot this. I thought my beauty was myself, my power, my purpose, and I became a monster because I could not imagine existing without consuming, without devouring all that loved me. You can be different. You can create without destroying. You can be beautiful without being deadly. This is the gift I give you, the wisdom bought with my suffering." The young artist gasped, staggering back from the stone. Had she imagined it? Had her grief and exhaustion created phantoms, words where there were only wind and silence? But her heart knew otherwise. Something had touched her, something ancient and sorrowful and somehow kind, sharing wisdom earned through centuries of mistakes. She bowed to the stone, a deep, formal bow of respect and gratitude. Then she returned to her studio and created the most honest work of her life, beautiful but human, perfect in its imperfections, seductive without being destructive. And she never forgot the lesson learned at the feet of a demon's prison. Others came with their own burdens, their own questions. A businessman who had built an empire by consuming competitors, who wondered if success must always mean destruction. A mother who loved her children so intensely she feared smothering them, making them extensions of herself rather than independent beings. A priest who struggled with the tension between spiritual devotion and human desire, wondering if one must always exclude the other. And to each, the stone offered its silent wisdom, the accumulated understanding of a spirit that had lived too long, loved too wrongly, and finally learned what it meant to exist without consuming everything beautiful within reach. The fragment of Tamamo that wandered the world felt these encounters, these small moments of connection and teaching. And she felt something she had not experienced in her 1,000 years of existence. Purpose without hunger, meaning without possession. She was still what she was, a fox spirit, dangerous and beautiful, other and liminal. But she was learning to be those things without making them weapons, without turning her nature into a curse for everyone she touched. Winter came to Nasu Plain, covering the Sesoseki in snow, softening its harsh black edges with white. The cracked stone stood like a monument to contradiction, beautiful and terrible, sacred and profane, prison and shrine combined into something that defied simple categorization. On the longest night of the year, when darkness held the world in its deepest embrace, foxes gathered around the stone, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, coming from forests and mountains and cities, drawn by something they couldn't name but felt in their bones. They formed circles within circles, their eyes glowing in the darkness like constellations fallen to earth. And they sang, high, keening notes that rose and fell in patterns too complex for human music, too perfect for natural sound. It was grief and celebration, mourning and birth, ending and beginning. It was a song for Tamamo no Me, their legendary ancestor, their warning and their hope. The fragmentary consciousness that was all that remained free of Tamamo heard the song and was drawn to its source. She manifested on the plain in a form between fox and woman, neither fully one nor the other, visible only to those with eyes to see beyond the ordinary. 9 tails of mist and moonlight spread behind her, beautiful and insubstantial as breath on winter air. She approached the stone that had held her for so long, and for the first time since her escape, she considered what she truly wanted. The rest of her essence remained trapped within that cracked black stone. Her hunger, her power, her ability to transform and seduce and consume. She could try to reclaim it, become whole again, return to what she had been. The stone was broken, the seal was weakened. With effort, she might free the rest of herself, resume her existence as a 9-tailed demon in full power. Or she could let it remain. Let that part of herself stay sealed, its hunger contained, its danger bound. She could exist as she was now, incomplete, weak, but also free in a way she had never been before. Free from the compulsion to consume, the need to possess, this cycle of beauty and destruction that had defined her for a millennium. She thought of Emperor Toba, who had loved her so completely. She thought of all the others across centuries who had offered their devotion and their lives to her beauty. She had taken everything they gave and still wanted more, because hunger without limit knows no satisfaction. But what if she chose limitation? What if she accepted incompleteness as a kind of liberation? The foxes continued their song, waiting. They did not judge. Foxes don't think in terms of judgment. They simply waited to see what their legendary ancestor would choose, what story they would carry forward into future generations. Tamamo knelt before the stone, placing her ghostly hand on its cold surface. She could feel the rest of herself within, dormant but still present, still carrying all the power and hunger she had once thought essential to her existence. And she made her choice. "Stay," she whispered to the stone, to the part of herself it contained. "Rest here. Let your hunger sleep. I will remain as I am, a fragment, a shadow, a whisper of what I was. It is enough, more than enough. For the first time in 1,000 years, I am not hungry, and that is a gift beyond price." The stone seemed to pulse once, acknowledging her choice. And in that moment, the crack that had split it began to seal, not completely, but enough. Enough to reinforce the containment, to ensure that what remained imprisoned would stay imprisoned, not through external force, but through Tamamo's own will, her own choice to remain divided, to keep the most dangerous parts of herself bound. The fox's song changed, becoming something like joy, like relief, like the sound of a story finding its proper ending. They sang until dawn touched the eastern sky, then dispersed, returning to their forests and fields and shrines, carrying with them the tale of Tamamo no Mei's final choice. Not redemption exactly, but something perhaps more profound. Acceptance, limitation, the wisdom to know that sometimes remaining incomplete is the only way to be whole. Epilogue: The Eternal Dream. And so the legend continues, but changed now, evolved into something new. Tamamo no Mei exists still, a fragmentary consciousness wandering the spaces between, visiting dreams, touching the minds of artists and poets, and those who struggle with the tension between desire and wisdom, between beauty and destruction. She is no longer a demon to be feared, though she remains dangerous in her way. Dangerous, as all beautiful things are dangerous, as all truths that challenge comfortable illusions are dangerous. She is a teacher now, a guide, a reminder that existence is complex, that hunger must be balanced with restraint, that power without wisdom leads only to suffering. The Seshoseki stands on Nasu Plain, cracked but no longer breaking, its essence contained not by external seals alone, but by the will of the spirit it imprisons. Pilgrims still visit, seekers still come seeking wisdom, and foxes still gather on winter nights to sing their wordless songs. And sometimes, if you listen very carefully on a moonlit night near any fox shrine in Japan, you might hear something, a voice like bells in wind, like poetry whispered in darkness, like the sigh of someone who has finally, after 1,000 years, found rest. I was beautiful, and beauty was my curse. I was hungry, and hunger consumed me more than I consumed others. I was powerful, and power made me weak. But I learned eventually that wisdom is not strength but surrender, not accumulation but release, not becoming more, but accepting less. This is my gift to you, dreamer, wanderer, seeker. Know your hunger, but do not let it define you. Appreciate beauty, but do not try to possess it. Live fully, but remember that all things end, and ending is not failure, but completion. I am Tamamo no Mei, the nine-tailed fox, the demon who learned to be a spirit, the hunger that learned to rest, and I am at peace. The story fades like mist at sunrise, like dreams upon waking, like the memory of beauty that once broke hearts and kingdoms. But the lesson remains, woven into the fabric of night, waiting for those who need it, those who struggle with their own hungers and desires, and the terrible power of being both beautiful and dangerous at once. Sleep now, dreamer. Sleep with the knowledge that even demons can learn, even curses can transform, even the longest night eventually yields to dawn. The foxes are singing in the distant mountains, nine tails spread like silver banners against the stars, and their song says, rest, release, let go. All things find their ending, and all endings are also beginnings. The wheel turns, the seasons change, and somewhere between the beautiful and the terrible, between hunger and satisfaction, between the demon and the divine, there is a space where souls can finally rest, sleep and dream of moonlight on snow, of distant shrines where incense rises like prayer, of stories that echo through centuries, teaching and transforming and offering their quiet wisdom to all who have ears to hear. Sleep, and let the tale of Tamamo no Me carry you gently into darkness, into rest, into the peace that comes from understanding that beauty and terror, desire and destruction are not opposites but partners in the eternal dance of existence. Sleep, and know that even the hungriest spirit can learn contentment. Even the most cursed soul can find peace. Even the longest story eventually finds its ending, drifting softly into silence, into stillness, into the deep and dreamless rest that waits beyond all tales, all legends, all memories of foxes and emperors, and the beautiful, dangerous things that walk between worlds.